Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the 2025 Employment Law and UAE Labour Market Outlook. My name is Bianca Beck and I am the Middle East Marketing Manager here at Sovereign PPG. We will be covering a few key topics today, including the introduction of who we are to start with, an overview of the labour law updates that we have seen come into place towards the end of 2024 and going into 2025. Employment trends we are seeing cropping up across the UAE, end of service gratuity and the importance of planning for these requirements. What Emiratization is going to look like going into 2025, and finally, how we can help with HR consultancy. Next slide, please, Faraz. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to who we are Sovereign PPG, and we are the Middle East brand of the wider Sovereign Group, who are based in 26 jurisdictions across the globe. Here in the Middle East, we are a leading company formation, local partnership, PRO, and corporate service provider, and we have offices based in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Northern Emirates, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And part of our corporate service offering is HR services and HR consultancy. So very fittingly, we have our host today, Faraz Ahmed, who is our HR consultant. He is based here in our UAE offices, but himself and the team assist clients with HR consultancy, labor law, and employment law requirements across the GCC. So I just need to let everybody know that today's session is going to be recorded and the presentation will be shared with everyone who has attended the session today. We also have the opportunity for you to ask any questions. So please do use the Q&A section to kind of input any of your questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to pop them in there and we'll get to them at the end. Questions on what Faraz does or doesn't cover, but just pop your questions in there and we'll get to them. So, right, Faraz, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bianca, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. As Bianca mentioned, we will cover a fair few topics for the session, and we have the Q&A feature there for any questions that you have. We have a dedicated 15 to 20 minutes towards the end to cover any questions, so hopefully we can cover all of that. With that being said, let's get started. Very first thing we're going to do is have an overview of labour law updates going into the next year. So the first thing to know is that in 2024, the UAE published the Federal Decree Law number 9 of 2024, which amends some of the provisions of the UAE labour law. Some of those amendments include changes to the time that you can make claims. So the statute of limitation for claiming under the UAE labour law has changed from 1 year, which was the previous provision, to now 2 years from the date of termination. So employees now have a longer period of time before things are taken to the court to settle claims internally through arbitration. The next thing to note is that the fines for malpractice or violations of the UAE labour laws have now increased. The previous provisions of the UAE labour law had them at between 50,000 to up to maximum 200,000 dirhams. That has now been changed from 100,000 to 1 million dirhams for violations. For example, false emiratization. I believe recently in the news there was a lot of updates about Mahri placing large fines on companies that were faking their emiratization to meet quotas. The next thing as well that's been updated is that decisions made by Mahri which fall underneath 50,000 dirhams can be taken directly to the court of first instance. This is just a way to streamline the process where there's complexities involved in the labour claims, and rather than going through Mahri, who would then refer you to the next court, you can bypass that first step and go directly to directly to the court of first instance. And the last point is something not many people know about. Mohri have launched a new system called Work Bundle. The Work Bundle system is in essence designed to be your unified place where you can do all operations such as visa renewals, work permit applications, cancellations, medical file documentation, issuance of the Emirates ID. This is a system that employers will need to register with. It's not something that just comes off the gate, but it's designed in essence to help streamline the process and make it more unified, so you don't have to go to different websites and different portals and different departments to onboard an employee or to offboard an employee. It's all done under one house. Moving on to workforce trends in the UAE, there are a few things that we've seen coming up in the UAE, things that are emerging, and we are finally seeing a shift in the UAE more to what our Western counterparts have been doing. So some of the things include remote working, remote and hybrid working. The cough of COVID-19 saw us adapt very quickly, a shift towards remote working and a shift towards hybrid models. Now, the Dubai government have now started to really encourage the utilization of hybrid work models, and work-life balance, I think, has now become a very important factor for all employees, and I think it's now shifting into how business culture manages this. So this includes everything from manager mindset, policies that you have in place, and I think employers are now struggling to understand how do you keep the same standards of performance and consistency that you would have in the workplace to those where employees who are now working remotely. We will cover what you as an employer can do in terms of managing this. The next thing we are also seeing in terms of engagement and satisfaction is that UAE as a whole, compared to a global audience, we are fairly high up in terms of leadership and engagement. We in the UAE have a very high percentage of overall employee engagement, but it's important to note that despite the higher levels of engagement, there is still a vast majority of employees who plan to make a change within the next 12 months with their employers. So it comes down to a matter of understanding employee retention, the strategies that you can put into place with keeping your employees retained within the business, whether that be continued development, whether that be upskilling, salary benchmarking, promotions. Those are all different ways that we can look into how you keep your workforce engaged. And the last big trend in the UAE is now, of course, become DEI. We as a country are one of the very few countries across the world where equal pay for women is actually a statutory right, and it's in the UAE labour law. As per Article 32 of the UAE labour law, any female worker should be given a wage equal to that of their male counterparts. We've also seen that come 2025, the UAE is pushing for a mandatory female board of directors seat for all private joint companies. And we really see that this model is possibly going to start moving into other types of establishments, not just PJSCs. 2024 also saw a real clampdown from Mohri and the government in total in terms of nationality quotas. So as we know that 20% of any given nationality should not be exceeded. Exceeding these quotas means that you as a company reduce your classifications. Now, what does classifications mean? That essentially is a standard in terms of the government. The lower your standard gets, the more costs you are going to incur for issuing new work permits and new visas. So the best classification you would want to have is a classification 1, the worst being classification 3. Of course, we've seen Emiratization. That seems to be the talk of the town, basically at any given time of the year, but especially now, since we approach our target deadlines. That again is a push by the UAE to implement more of their culture and their people into private workforce. And the last thing to know is that the UAE is making a push to become neurodiverse ready. Dubai especially expects to be the first city out of 174 countries to be fully neurodiverse ready. So that's a really good thing to see, that we are embracing neurodiversity, both in the workplace as well as just in general in public. So we've talked about remote working and hybrid working, and we've talked about satisfaction and engagement. So how do you as a business plan to reshape that, right? So what are you planning to do? Let's take a look at remote working and hybrid models. We know from statistics and surveys conducted that 56% of employees have shown interest in being fully remote. And in the UAE, currently 32% of companies have already started to transition towards hybrid models. And there's a very large sum of employees, about 90% of employees, that would like to see hybrid models implemented into their workplace. You as an employer, then, how do you help meet that gap and make your business as competitive as possible by satisfying those trends? The first thing for you to do is build a foundation. Now, policies are that foundation for you, and policies help create a guideline and a framework for your employees to see what they need to do. Policies can range from different ones, such as flexi time policies. This is really important for working parents that have children that need to do school runs in the morning. A lot of schools start at different times, whether it's a nursery or primary school. So it gives your employees the flexibility of having staggered start times. You can have policies on remote working, as well as virtual meeting etiquette policies. This would dictate that you are ensuring continuity of performance. The same way it would be in the office, you have that applied as well in people's work locations, whether they're working from home or whether they're in a hotel or they're traveling abroad. So I think it's really important to manage that work-life balance. And I think the work-life balance can be managed really efficiently by having a solid set of foundations and policies put into place. Now, moving away from hybrid models and from remote working, we have the employee engagement. In the UAE, one of the biggest trends for employee engagement is transparency, right? 87% of employees in the UAE have found that they value flexibility in their work, they value transparency in their work, they value clear expectations. So what can you as an employer again do to help improve the employee engagement? And I think it starts from the very offset or the very beginning of your relationship with an employee, and that is all the way at the beginning of the recruitment stage. I think it works well to have a clear recruitment strategy and clear requirement and process in place, focusing more on the job specific description and how it affects the broader and what the broader impact of that specific role will be on the business. I think having candidate pools is very important now in terms of both current and future workforce needs. It gives you the ability to maintain relations with potential candidates for your future workforce requirements. The next thing to focus on would be onboarding processes. I'm sure a lot of us in this country would have experienced being onboarded into a business and on day one being left to manage themselves. I think first impressions really matter, which is why creating an induction experience for your employees that really shows support, guidance, and mentorship is extremely important. It's always good for new joiners to meet heads of other departments. It's good for new joiners to have meetings with their line managers to set clear expectations and targets for the first few months. It's important to have training on systems that you might use in your company, whether that be CRM systems, whether that be your own in-house HR management systems, finance systems, whatever it may be. But I think the general consensus is to have a community where you're providing guidance, support, and structure to the onboarding process rather than simply bringing an employee in and letting them manage from day one. The next thing to do would be career development, and with that comes a lot of learning and development as well. Continued growth has been one of the highest requirements in terms of what employees are looking for in their role. Currently, 61% of employees say that they do need to learn, whether it's new tools, strategies, or technologies to perform their jobs. We are especially seeing this since the emergence of Gen AI. See, Gen AI now is seeping into multiple different aspects of businesses, whether it's from a HR perspective in recruitment, whether it's from a business organization decision making. So I think it's very important for continuous upskilling for employees to remain engaged, and upskilling your staff is in essence one of the best returns on investments that you can make, because it allows them to adapt to the new technologies, new evolving business needs, and it gives you as an employer a clear competitive edge. And the last one I would say is setting clear expectations and regular feedback. A lot of people in this country will come into their role not really knowing what is expected for them. So I think it's really important to know that when you set clear expectations from the outset, you are in turn enabling your employees for success. Whereas if they don't know what to expect, if they don't know what is expected from them, it's more setting them up for failure. Employees in the UAE, at least 82% of the respondents of the survey said that most of their organizations and senior leadership do set very clear and transparent expectations. And I think this is one of the key drivers towards the higher engagement levels in the UAE compared to a more global average. And I think it's very important that you have regular communications between the employees and their line managers, regular feedback sessions to make sure that they are in line with achieving their KPIs, achieving their targets. Now, one thing that we should probably talk about is salaries. Fair pay in the UAE is a really high driver for employee engagement or dissatisfaction, whichever way it falls. So I think it's very important that you as an entity conduct, at least on an annual basis, regular salary benchmarking activities to make sure that you are not underselling or overselling your job roles. It's a good way to see where you are competitively as well against your peers your given industry. And salary benchmarking is really good because you as a business can now then see internally what are the specific job roles and what are the job positions in the company, where they said, is there a benchmark for different levels of experience? Are there grades to your salary that can be adjusted or that can be merged together? So it's a very important thing for you as a business to look at doing this activity on an annual basis. Okay, the next thing that we will touch upon is going to be end of service gratuity. Now, I know most of you are going to be HR working with employers, so end of service gratuity is a very simple, straightforward thing. It's a statutory right in the UAE for all employees that have covered over a year of work. Now, this applies to employees that are full-time, part-time, that might be job sharing, or that are flexible or remote working. Non-compliance, of course, of end of service can result in severe fines, not just from a financial perspective, but also an operational perspective. One thing to note about end of service is a lot of companies in this country, especially 7 out of 10, so that's 70%, do not plan ahead for their end of service. And that is something that I will touch upon in just a minute about what you can do. But the biggest thing that we've seen in terms of trend in the UAE is that we have now got a voluntary end of service savings scheme that has been launched by the UAE government for as an alternative approach to end of service. What the alternative end of service scheme provides is a structured investment for employers upon the completion of their service. So much like the standard end of service, it's an investment platform. Now, employers who do participate in the alternate program are required to make contributions on a monthly basis to one of the licensed investment funds by Mohri. One thing that sets this investment plan apart is the fact that employees can make voluntary top-ups besides just what the employer is putting in. And you can do this for up to 25% monthly of your monthly salary. Now, many of you may know that when you are paying your employees through WPS, you have a limitation, which is you cannot deduct more than 10% of their salary. However, employers who are registered in this program are entitled to make deductions of up to 25% based on what the employee would like. Moving on to the fact of liabilities. As I mentioned, 70% of employers in this country do not manage their liabilities properly. What businesses often end up doing is using petty cash or operational cash to cover any unexpected exits. I think it's really important that employers start taking more proactive measures to manage their obligations effectively rather than be reactive to anyone exiting the company. A best practice or rule of thumb should be that businesses maintain a dedicated end of service reserve fund, for example. This would be putting away 5.83% of any employee's monthly salary into a fund if they fall underneath 5 years of service, or 8.33% if they fall above 5 years of service. The reason this is important is that you gradually build a buffer to cover any exits, right? And it avoids you stretching the business thin to cover any liabilities. If we take a look at COVID-19, there was mass redundancies, there were mass exits and mass terminations. So this put a lot of stress on many businesses who were suffering already in terms of legal payouts for the end of service gratuity.
Faraz, sorry, just to go back, we'll
Yeah.
save all other questions, but Betty was just asking if you could explain a little bit about how the calculation for end of service gratuity works.
Yep. So end of service gratuity calculations is based on basic salary, and it is always based on the last drawn basic salary. So let's say, for example, if your employee started their contract at 30,000, and for whatever reason their remuneration was brought down to 15,000, if 15,000 is the last drawn salary, the end of service for the entire period of employment will be based on the 15,000 and not the 30,000. End of service works in terms of 5.83% for the first 5 years of their basic salary. And then for every year after that will be 8.33%. Or in simpler terms, 21 days of basic salary for the first 5 years, 30 days of basic salary for the years following. 15,000. Okay, so if the basic salary is mentioned as 5,000 and the remaining allowances is 15, so total 20,000, the end of service will be calculated just at the 5,000. So whatever your basic salary is mentioned on your Mahri contract or your Ministry of Labour contract, that is the amount that needs to be used as a calculation basis for your end of service gratuity, not the overall. But sometimes companies can do it based on the overall and mention it as part of a final settlement payout. But that again is discretionary. By law, it needs to be 5.83% or 8.33%. I hope that clears it up, Bianca.
Yeah, Betsy, if you have any other questions, you can speak to Faraz at the end of the session about your specific requirements. Yeah, that answers the question, Faraz. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so the next topic we're going to touch upon is going to be Emiratization. Now, again, Emiratization seems to be talk of the town. We are closing in on specific deadlines, but I also want to give you an idea about what to look forward to in 2025. So when we discuss deadlines, the next deadline coming up is the 31st of December this year. What this means is that if you are an employer that has between 20 to 49 employees in your entity, you need to have made sure that by the 31st of December, you have one Emirati fully hired. Similarly, if you are an entity with 50 plus employees, you need to make sure that your total workforce, 6% of them are Emiratis. So if you have 50 employees, for example, at least 3 Emiratis need to be hired within the business. The deadline after this, the first deadline of 2025 is going to be the 1st of June, where you need to make one additional Emirati hire. So if you are a company between 20 to 49, by this stage, you need to now have 2 Emiratis. And vice versa for 50 plus employees, you need to have a total of 7%. And then the last deadline for 2025 is going to be the 31st of December 2025. Businesses from 20 to 49 employees need to have made a total of 2 hires, Emirati hires in 2025. And the businesses with 50 plus employees need to make sure that they are covering 8% of their workforce. The part of Emiratization is also pension registration, and it's very important to note that in the UAE, to satisfy your Emiratization targets, your Emirati members must be fully registered with the relevant pension authority, whether it's the GPSSA if it's Dubai or the Abu Dhabi Pension Fund for Abu Dhabi. This is to make sure that you in 2025 are not being fined for 96,000 dirhams for any Emirati target not met. Now, when we talk about how you hire an Emirati, it's important to know that the NAFIS portal, which was launched by the UAE government, is designed specifically to help you employ Emirati citizens. It creates job opportunities on the platform and it allows you to source pools of Emirati nationals with prerequisite competencies based on what your requirements are. There are benefits to you as an employer registering with the NAFIS system and hiring an Emirati through the NAFIS system. The first is the employee salary support scheme. What this basically does is it gives UAE nationals a government provided salary top up. So if an Emirati employee, for example, is under 20,000 salary, so let's say 15,000, for example, the government can provide a top up of between 5 to 7,000 dirhams. And the amount is generally based on the highest qualification level that Emirati employee has. If the employee's salary, for example, is under 30,000 dirhams, then there is also a top-up supplement, but that is capped at 3,500 dirhams. So if you have an Emirati employee, for example, at 25,000 dirham monthly salary, the government will supplement an additional 3,500 dirhams monthly, bringing their total to 28,500. Now, the next benefit for using the NAFIS system is, in my opinion, the best benefit there is, and that is the pension support program. How this works, in essence, as I mentioned, all Emirati employees need to be put on the pension program. Employers who are using the NAFIS program do receive a 5-year support rebate program. What that means is in year 1, the UAE government will pay the employee's contribution as well as the employer's contribution for the employee's pensions. Now, every year, the government contributions will reduce by a certain percentage while the employee and your contributions will increase. But it's in essence a program designed to help bring more enticement towards bringing in Emirati employees, as a very cost-effective measure, because for the first year, you as an employer are not paying towards any contributions. Now, it's important to know that this NAFIS benefit can only be initiated by the employee, not by you as the company. So the employee has to make a request to register with the pension support program, and only then is this benefit, I guess, rewarded towards you. Speaking of pensions, as part of you satisfying your Emiratization targets, you do need to register your employee with the relevant pension authority. In terms of how you register, the first step is always to register your company, and where you register is based on where your office headquarters are. So if you have a business that has a headquarters in Dubai, but a branch in Abu Dhabi, and the employee that you're hiring is going to the branch in Abu Dhabi, they would still need to be registered with the Dubai Pension Authority. This is because pension is based on headquarter location rather than branch location. So for all employees being hired with businesses that have the headquarters in Dubai, it must be with GPSSA. Similarly, any business that has their headquarters in Abu Dhabi will need to be the Abu Dhabi Pension Fund. Once your employee is registered with either pension authority, once the company is registered with either pension authority, the next step is to actually register your employee. This again can be a bit of a lengthy process, especially with the new launch of the GPSSA portal. But it's very important to note that you have all the requirements ready. As part of the new launch that happened in 28th of October 2024, the new system that they launched for GPSSA, it is now mandatory that all your Emirati employees or all your GCC national employees have a medical clearance certificate. This is very similar to what we do anyways for expatriate employees that have a new visa that they have to get approved. But the medical fitness certificate is from a very specific provider and not the same provider that you would use for expatriate employees. It's also very important to note that if you as a business hire any GCC nationals, so that's your Bahrainis from Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, if you hire any of them in the UAE, they also need to be registered with GPSSA. So that's a very important thing to know that a lot of people might not know about. Okay, so now I'll give you a bit of a brief about what we as a company can provide to you in terms of support, especially around the topics that we've mentioned. We do a lot of HR consultancy work, which includes development of policies for companies, their employment handbooks. We help design job offer letters and employment contracts that are compliant with UAE labour law. We provide them to you with templates. We assist with termination processes and procedures for any employees that need to be offboarded, as well as performance management. We have two key service offerings that we do, which is the HR function setup and the outsourced HR. Both of these are designed to assist businesses either from helping set up the entire HR function for them, all the way to managing their day-to-day HR. We also are a outsourced payroll provider, which we, in terms of managing and processing a monthly payroll. And then, of course, we do pension registration. So we have clients that come to us to mitigate the complexities of pension registration. We register our clients with either GPSSA or ADPF, both from the employer perspective as well as the employee perspective. That's just a very brief summary about our services. And I think, Bianca, with that, we have concluded the outlook, and we'll come into our Q&A session.
Yeah, so we actually have a few other questions that we weren't able to get to before. So Alex was just asking a question about end of service gratuity and our mention of kind of building those liabilities in against a trust. So he just was asking a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, I'm just opening up our Q&A section so I can go through all the questions one by one. But in essence, Alex, what you would need to do is, it's best practice, right? So there's no mandatory requirement that you must maintain or reserve a fund, but it's a way to avoid you dipping into petty cash or operational costs to cover your expenses for a leaving employee. When you have an employee terminated, you must settle all claims 14 days within 14 days of cancelling their visa. So the timelines are very tight. In that sense, it's always good to have a reserve fund. How we work is we have offshore funds in multiple locations where you can keep either it as a trust or as a fund, and then that builds up on a monthly basis. That gives you a buffer that anytime someone does leave, you've got the funds there to keep yourself protected, and you're not having to dip into your petty cash. You're not having to take out a corporate loan, for example, to cover your liabilities. It's just more best practice.
And then Farida was asking here a bit about the salaries. Obviously, I think this relates to the end of service gratuity calculation about, is there a minimum basic salary standard in the UAE? I guess what portion of the salary needs to be basic?
So there's no minimum requirement for basic. We've seen companies offering 100% of the salary as basic salary, but this is generally more for executive leadership or C-suite staff. The best practice here, again, is 60-40, 60% being towards the basic and 40% being towards remaining allowances. But there is a very wide gambit of how different companies structure it. Some do 50-50, some do lower percentages, but I think it's more about being fair and providing equal opportunities to your employees from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, and also I guess with the process of onboarding employee, that might be something that they look at, right? So in terms of employee satisfaction.
Exactly.
And then someone was asking about, is there a difference between gratuity being calculated in mainland versus free zones?
No, so gratuity is calculated equally throughout mainland and free zones, as long as the employee has satisfied 1 year of continuous service.
Okay, perfect. And then on the line of Emiratization questions, is Emiratization apply to free zones?
Emiratization does apply to free zones. There is a misconception sometimes that it doesn't. Emiratization currently applies across 24 industries, but regardless of where you are based, whether it be mainland or a free zone.
Okay, I hope that answered that question. Another question about pension registrations. So is it needed, for example, if you have an Emirati employee, with less than 20 employees, is pension registration required whether you are using it for kind of Emiratization target purposes or you already have Emiratis onboarded in your organization?
Absolutely. So even if you are a company that has 5 employees, for example, and you have an Emirati employee, you will still need to register through the pension program. Any private company that hires an Emirati employee, regardless of the size of the company, will need to register. This actually even extends to self-owned companies. So Emirati individuals, for example, who own their own company and operate as a one-man band, for example, will also need to register with pensions. This is because every single Emirati working needs to be registered with the pension program and have that pension provident available to them upon their retirement.
Yep. And that would apply to the company as well, right? The company would have to register whether they have 5 employees or
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
So
and then
no
yeah,
company
sorry.
can. So you can't register an Emirati employee unless your company has an account and a profile set up in the portals.
Okay, that's very clear. Is there salary brackets defined for Emirati employees?
Yes and no. It's very broad. There will be in the next coming years specific jobs that Emiratis need to be, or certain jobs that need to be reserved for Emirati employees in the coming years. But currently, by law, there's no limit. I think it's just again general best practice of equal pay, and there shouldn't be disparity based on nationality. There shouldn't be disparity based on gender, and that's something that we mentioned in terms of the DEI aspect. Is that the UAE is making a very strong push on equality across the gambit, whether it be for religious purposes, whether it be nationality, gender, whatever it may be.
Yeah, okay. And then someone was asking about with the kind of implementation more regularly of hybrid models in workplaces, how does that work with visa allocation with regards to office space? If you've got people working alternative days, can they kind of essentially have more visas allocated to an office?
So this again comes down to a decision by Mohri, but it depends, right? So if you have an employee on a full-time work employment contract, but they're working remote hours, or there's flexibility, it would not make any difference because you're still meeting your labor quota in terms of office space as well, like it would be. It might differ slightly if the employee is on an actual remote work visa or a nomad visa, then that differs slightly. But if they are still on a full-time employment contract or on a normal residency visa sponsored by the company, it would not mitigate or negate the labor quota requirements, even if they are working 2 days a week and someone else comes and replaces them or moves around the pattern.
Yeah, so from a technological point of view, it doesn't make a difference, but the
It
hybrid
doesn't.
working obviously makes a difference to employee engagement satisfaction,
Exactly.
that element
Exactly.
of employment.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, and then with regards to the 20% nationality that we're seeing kind of being clamped down on, what are the consequences of having more than 20%? What are we seeing in
So
terms of restrictions, fines?
So the biggest consequence is the reduction in your company classification. So if you are satisfying the requirements set out by Mockery, your company remains classified as a level 1. Anytime you start breaching those requirements of that quota, you reduce your classification. Now, if your classification comes down to level 3, for example, that means that compared to the of a classification 1, you are paying exponentially more money when you apply for a new work permit and a new visa for a new hire, compared to that of level 1. That, for one, is the biggest put off, because if you have, for example, a new hire, it can be between 8 to 9,000 dirhams visa costs, just to hire that employee, compared to that of 3 to 4,000 dirhams if you were classification 1.
Yeah. And I know our operations team have actually reported not being able to successfully complete visa applications when some companies have exceeded their quota. So it might be to a degree of not being able to actually get the visa issued.
Exactly.
For people exceeding the quotas. Somebody has a question here about termination period.
Yeah.
Sorry, being terminated during probation.
Okay.
If an employee has taken a loan from a company, would the employee be required to pay the company back the loan?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I think that's pretty, I don't think we need to
Yeah.
go further into that. Is it reasonable to adjust salaries when implementing hybrid work models?
Again, salary deductions are very tricky to navigate. If you, especially, are a company that pays your monthly payroll based on through WPS, you need to remember that you can only have a maximum of 10% deductions. It's best practice now not to have varying amounts of salary on a month-to-month basis because someone works hybrid. It's more about building policies and a framework that gives you, the company, the confidence and the trust that your employees are producing the same results, whether they work from home or whether they work from the office.
Another question about if an employee doesn't sign their visa cancellation form, can the company still proceed with canceling the visa?
No, so the employee generally needs to sign off stating that they have received their final settlements and all dues have been settled, whether it's deductions from the employee side or whether it's the employer having to pay out different amounts on the final settlement. However, there are sometimes cases where employees outright refuse to. In that instance, the employer can raise a complaint with Mohri, provided that they show sufficient evidence that they have regularly tried to approach the employee, they've communicated with the employee, and all those efforts have been redundant, essentially. In that instance, Mohri can take the decision to bypass the employee and go through with immigration to cancel the visa.
Okay. Joelle was just confirming, is there any Emiratization requirements for companies with under 20 employees?
No, there is not.
Employees, do we have to employ? Sorry, Mohammed's just asking here. He's got a free zone company with 25 employees. Do they need to employ an Emirati in the business?
They will be, if they fall within the 24 industries that the 24 different types of industries that relate to Emiratization, and that full list of 24 industries is available on the UAE website, on the government website for Emiratization, then yes, you will be eligible for Emiratization. If you do not, then you have no requirement to do so.
I will also put in Faraz's email address into the chat in a little while so that you can speak to him about your specific requirements post-webinar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mohammed, if that didn't fully answer your question. Yes, Emiratization is applicable to free zone companies. We covered that before, so in case you missed that. It says
There's
Emiratization was, oh yes, it's a kind of repeating question, so I'm hoping we've answered that now, that it is specific to the sectors, the 24 different sectors, Emiratization. Is it mandatory for your Emirati employee to work an 8-hour day? That's how I've read Beaver's question.
No. So again, if your Emirati worker is working an alternate working pattern, that's okay. There's no mandatory requirements that they need to meet 8 hours, but it's important to know that you do not exceed the mandatory working hours, which is 14 hours a week.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to see the questions that haven't already been answered.
I've just seen one from Anne Kakwat. If the employee has a loan and the repayment is more than 20% of the deduction of the salary, even is there any penalty? And this would be dependent on if your monthly payroll is done through WPS. If yes, then you risk your WPS being blocked, and you would have to then get that unblocked. And then if your WPS is blocked, you're risking unpaid salaries, which adds on additional fines as well. So there are consequences of exceeding the 10% deduction. It'd be good if you would like and have a chat maybe at the end of this session.
Tanja was just also asking something with regards to the 20% nationality quota. Does this apply to companies regardless of their size?
Yes, absolutely. So there's no legality in terms of you have to be a certain size to meet nationality quotas. Again, this is a push from the UAE government to ensure that there's a wide range of culture, and there's no demographic bias when it comes to recruitment and when it comes to hiring, and there's a diversity aspect that's involved. So regardless of size, this would apply.
Okay, Nad's asking, and I think we covered this already, about end of service gratuity calculations, mainland versus free zone, but being the same. ADGM specifically, the same or different?
Across the UAE, it's the same.
So just to be clear, mainland and free zone end of service gratuity calculations are calculated the same way. I hope that answered your question, Nad.
So just important to know that if you are an employer in DIFC, you wouldn't have end of service gratuity because you would be the DIFC dues program is what takes into account there.
Ajnas was just asking about the application process for the pension schemes. Is there anything more detail related that we can give in terms of the application like how to go about applying?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me at the end of the session and I can give you a more descriptive information. But in essence, the steps are that you register your company with the GIPSA portal. They'll give you a requirement of documents that you need to submit, and you need to have certain things set aside, such as memorandums of association or powers of attorney for an authorized signatory. The same goes for an employee. When you register your employee now with the GPSSA system, you need to mandatorily have a medical fitness clearance certificate for them.
Aileen was asking if the company was only registered in 2024, is their Emiratization target the same as companies that have been registered for many years? Is December the deadline?
If your company exceeds 20 employees, then yes. There's
So
no statute that says
it starts in a year's
minimum,
time or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it starts from December. Aileen, I hope that answered your question. Is pension registration mandatory for GCC nationals? The answer to that is yes.
Absolutely, yes. So
Yep.
the GCC nationals in the UAE, there's an extended insurance protection program that's run between all GCC countries. We have an info sheet on this as well that outlines what the percentage contributions for different GCC nationals will be. Maybe we can pass that on, Bianca, at the end of the session as well.
Yeah. Sorry, just going back to the question about a loan being taken out from the company during the probation period and the employee being terminated, can the loan repayment be deducted from the salary?
Yes, the loan repayment can be deducted from the salary, which would be part of the final settlement. Of course, if an employee is in their probation period, they would not be entitled to an end of service gratuity, but deductions can be made from the final settlement, which is the payout.
Libby's asking about Emiratization. Does it apply in DIFC and ADGM?
Emiratization applies across the board.
Perfect, thank you. If the employee resigns and the notice period is 1 month, is the employer allowed to release him immediately without the approval of the employee?
You cannot do it without the approval of the employee. It needs to be an agreement by both parties. And that agreement would only be possible if the employer pays out the 1 month notice period salary as part of the final settlement on exit. So if you have an employee, whether you're terminating them or they have resigned, you would need to come to an agreement between both parties that you exit immediately on the basis that you've received payment for that notice period.
Okay. Carol, I hope that answered your question. We have 2 company licenses, one in Dubai with 19 employees and one in Abu Dhabi with 5 employees. Is Emiratization required here?
No. So Emiratization works on individual licenses rather than group. If you are a group of companies with multiple different licenses, Emiratization will look at each individual license separately and not consider them the same. So in this instance, for the Dubai license, 19 employees, right now you don't have anything to think about, but as soon as you make your next 20th hire, you will be eligible to Emiratization.
And then, yeah, we're kind of wrapping up the session now. There's a couple more questions that we'll try and get to. Does the entity type matter as with regards to Emiratization? So, for example, a rep office versus an LLC.
No, so structure of the company makes no difference. It's the only mitigating factor for Emiratization is if you fall outside of the 24 different sectors mentioned by the UAE government.
WPS. I hear Camilla was asking about wage protection system. If you have, sorry, I heard you don't need to pay through the platform until you have more than 10 employees. Is that true?
No, absolutely not. I think there's, again, a very big misconception. If you are a company in the mainland or in some specific free zones, WPS is a mandatory requirement from your first hire onwards. So even if you have 1 employee, it would need to be done through WPS.
Understood. Anybody asking for the list or sectors that Emiratization apply to? It's available on Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization, but I will send again Faraz's contact email so you can have any follow-up conversations or questions with him. I'll ask one more just because then I'll take it to 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Hold on, sorry, I'm just trying to filter through. It says here, Amar's saying, on the government website, there is currently 14 listed sectors that Emiratization applies to. We have been saying 24.
It is 24, and I think it'd be worth us sending that link through just to mitigate any
We will send
emotions
through
there.
an updated link because maybe what some of you are seeing is something a bit outdated. We have just reached 12 o'clock, so I'm actually going to end the session there. I hope we were able to get through majority of your questions. If not, like I said, I'm about to post a contact email address where you can reach Faraz for any additional questions, engagement for services, etc. But we hope that you found the session very useful. Faraz, thank you very much for your time, and thank you all
Bianca.
for joining us. All right, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.